Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Cincinnati Reds Weekly Show on the Gruely Truth Sports Network. I'm your host for the Cincinnati Reds Weekly Show, Mike Goodpaster. And today we're going to talk a little Reds baseball. We're going to talk about the Nick Castellanos pickup, what that could mean for Senzel. Will Senzel be traded or will he be kept? And then we're going to have a little historical perspective, which we're going to add every week from now on. And today we're going to talk about the 1919 Cincinnati Reds, who are really history's forgotten team. And they're written off because of the Chicago Black Sox scandal. But we're going to look at exactly how good the 1919 Reds team was and why they get shortchanged. Now, I think it's time to give credit where credit is due. Dick Williams, Nick Krall, and the entire Cincinnati Reds front office deserves a standing ovation. Now, it's much too early to crack open the champagne and cover the clubhouse in plastic. After all, there's still 162 games left to play. And being in Ohio, you know how that works out if you're a Cleveland Browns fan also. But however, the Reds are the unquestioned winners of baseball's offseason so far. Owner Bob Castellani, President of Baseball Operations Dick Williams, and General Manager Nick Krall, and the entire front office have kept their promise. Going into this offseason, the Reds front office knew they had to make some big moves. The first and perhaps most shocking move of the winter was signing Mike Moustakas to a 4-year, $64 million deal doled out by the Reds, was the largest ever given to a free agent with the Reds. Not only that, the Reds rolled the dice a little bit, as Moustakas is being slated to play second base. Now, sure, Moustakas played second base for the Milwaukee Brewers in 2019, but that's not his primary position. Historically, Moustakas is a third baseman. And Moose was shifted to third last season by the Brewers in an effort to give Travis Shaw in the lineup he was shifted from third to get Travis Shaw in the lineup for the Brewers at the hot corner. Shaw had a terrible season, and Moustakas moved back to third base, starting just 40 games at second base. Not to be outdone, Williams and Krall worked their magic and signed left-handed starter Wade Miley to a 2-year deal. After back-to-back successful seasons, Miley showed he could be a productive piece in a rotation, and the Reds decided to reunite him with his former pitching coach, Derek Johnson, who he had a lot of success under a few years ago. Now, Miley will replace Tyler Mahle in the rotation. One of the better young pitchers in the Reds organization, Tyler last year limped to a 3-12 record, but showed improvement in other areas. Normally, penciling Mahle in as the Reds' fifth starter would not be a problem. But the front office felt otherwise this season and signed Miley to a $15 million contract. Now, the Reds have been rumored all season to be after the top outfielders on the market, whether it was Marcell Ozuna, Corey Dickerson, or Nicholas Castellanos. Now, Cincinnati was rumored to be in the hunt a couple weeks ago. However, the Reds front office changed course and settled on versatile Japanese outfielder Shogo Akiyama. Now, Cincinnati signed Akiyama to a 3-year, $21 million contract and expect the 31-year-old to be a key piece atop the Reds' batting order. Akiyama has a phenomenal career on-base percentage and is viewed as a player who's capable of playing all three outfield spots. The final feather in the cap of the Reds front office came this morning when it was reported that Cincinnati agreed to a 4-year contract with Castellanos. The power-hitting right fielder led all Major League Baseball last year in doubles. Now, the front office promised before the offseason began they'd be aggressive this winter, with an emphasis on upgrading the offense, and Dick Williams and Krall have done just that. That said, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention owner Bob Castellini. After all, he's the one signing the checks. Castellini has been viewed by some fans in a very negative light, but there's no denying that he wants to put a winner on the field this upcoming season. And even last year's trades for Yasiel Puig, Sonny Gray, Matt Kemp, and Trevor Bauer were all done with winning in mind. If Castellanos' deal, as it's being reported, is worth $64 million, then Castellini has put up $164 million in free agent contracts this winter. That's huge for a franchise typically viewed by fans as a small market. Bob is spending some big dough this offseason. Hopefully the fans will come out and support this team from day one. And now that the ownership has done their job, the front office has done their job, it's time for the Reds players and coaches to do theirs. The other teams in the National League Central have pretty much stood pat or gotten worse. A division crown and return to the postseason is in sight. It's time to put up or shut up for the Cincinnati Reds. Now, The next thing that comes with the Castellanos signing, like clockwork, is Nick Senzel's name being brought up on the trade market. And it was only a matter of time before the rumors began to circulate. And shortly after the Reds reportedly agreed to a 4-year deal with Castellanos, John Heyman, an insider at Major League Baseball Network, took to Twitter with an interesting report. According to Heyman, the Reds have discussed trading Nick Senzel. This should not come as a shock, as the Castellanos signing makes an already crowded outfield appear bursting at the seams. Cincinnati has 6 capable outfielders with Castellanos, Senzel, Winker, Aquino, Irvin, and Akiyama. You can bank on Castellanos and Akiyama getting regular at-bats in this lineup, and one would think the same goes for Senzel if he's on the team in 2020. Winker has been a regular in the Reds lineup for the past 2 seasons, but has finished 18 and 19 on the injured list. Irvin is more of a rotational outfielder, but shows a lot of promise. Then there's Aquino, who was the player of the month last August, and he brought a lot of electricity to Great American Ballpark. Now, these are rumors, and just because Senzel's name has been floated doesn't mean Cincinnati is shopping last year's rookie. Furthermore, a player with Senzel's ability will not be traded just to open a roster spot and declutter a supposedly cluttered outfield. Senzel is a former first-round pick who could be packaged with other prospects to bring in an elite level shortstop to the Queen City. To be honest, the only scenario in which I see Senzel being dealt is if the Cleveland Indians want to reopen the bidding for Francisco Lindor. Senzel would be a prime candidate to be included in a potential deal like that. If the Dodgers would want to send Corey Seager to Cincinnati, perhaps a third team could enter the negotiation. Otherwise, it's a hard pass for me on dealing Senzel for Seager. But I think with Lindor, if you can get Lindor, you do it. Other than that, I think you stand pat, because I think last year Senzel made the change from infield to outfield. He's a third baseman by trade. He spent the majority of his minor league career bouncing between second and third. And last year, in an effort to get Senzel into the lineup, the Reds converted him into a center fielder. The results were mixed, but he was not atrocious defensively. Now, if these latest Reds rumors are true, one has to believe the Cincinnati front office has at least one more move up its sleeve. Dick Williams and Nick Kroll have owned the off-season, and perhaps there's one more move that the Reds could pull out. Not just to be in a discussion for a divisional title, but maybe for the National League pennant. So I really like Nick Senzel, and I think outside of Francisco Lindor, there's nobody that I can foresee the Reds giving up for him, or at least I wouldn't if I was in the Reds front office. Now, today we're going to offer something a little bit different to our show. Of course, we're only in the 3rd week, so everything's a little bit different. But there are many assumptions in baseball history that are almost accepted wisdom. For example, it's treated as a near given that Ted Williams, had he not lost so many years in the military, would have finished his career as statistically the greatest hitter who ever lived. It's also assumed by many that the Montreal Expos, if not for the 1994 strike, would have won the World Series that year. It's also taken for granted that because a drunken writer named Al Stump wrote it, that Ty Cobb was a racist who was hated by damn near everybody. None of those assumptions and facts, even in the case of Ty Cobb, are true. They're just assumptions that have been proven to be dead wrong. Now, if you don't believe me about Cobb, you can go back and listen to an interview I did with New York. I mean, he's basically a best-selling author on the New York Times list, Charles Learson, who discussed Ty Cobb because he wrote a book about him. Now, this brings me to the belief that the 1919 Chicago White Sox would have run over the Cincinnati Reds in the 1919 World Series if not for the conspiracy to throw the series. Heck, in the movie 8 Men Out, a Reds player compares his team to Custer about to make a final and suicidal stand. But as we discovered, there were a lot of historical inaccuracies in the movie 8 Men Out, and I'm betting, no pun intended, that the quote from a Reds player was completely made up also. So in the end, my question today is, was the triumph of the 1919 Reds really that big of an upset? Could this team have won without the fix? Now, there's a few points I want to make here that a lot of people don't realize. Number one, the White Sox had 3 eventual Hall of Famers on the roster, not, of course, counting shoeless Joe Jackson, who would have been a first-ballot Hall of Famer without the gambling accusations. Only 2 of the 3, Ray Chalk and Eddie Collins, played in the World Series. There was a young spitballer named Red Faber who did not play in the series because of a problem with the flu that lingered and would eventually end his season long before that 1919 World Series. Now, it's not hard to say that missing a future Hall of Famer hurt the White Sox chances against a great Cincinnati Reds team. This, of course, is left out of the movie. It is never mentioned by anybody while discussing this World Series. Number 2, the 1919 Cincinnati Reds were a great baseball team. The 1919 Reds had a record that was absolutely amazing. Their .686 winning percentage was the highest for a Cincinnati team in the 20th century, and only .002 percentage points behind the 1882 American Association title-winning Cincinnati Red Stockings. That means that, yes, in winning percentage, the 1919 Reds were better even than the 1975 or 1976 Big Red Machine. The 1975 Reds were 108-54, which was a .667 winning percentage. It was the second best winning percentage of the entire decade of the 1910s, behind only the 1912 Red Sox, who were 105-47. And no team would have a winning percentage higher than the Cincinnati Reds of 19 again until 1927, which many historians consider the greatest team of all time. Of course, that's not true because that would be the 1975-76 Reds. But the 1919 Reds had one of the top 25 winning percentages in baseball history in the entire century. Now, by comparison, the 1919 White Sox were just 88-52 for a .629 winning percentage. The White Sox record was inferior to the Reds by a fair amount, and I know the National League was looked down upon by a lot of the country, and the American League was considered the far superior league at that time. But the Reds' record should have been very hard for anybody to ignore, even so-called experts. In the second half of the 1919 season, the Reds were an outstanding 47-19, winning over 70% of their games. By comparison, in the second half of the White Sox season, their record was 41-27, once again, well behind the Reds. Plus, the Reds ran away with the National League, and they were destroying the competition when most teams would have just been preparing for the World Series. Now, number 3. The old adage is, pitching wins championships. Defense, it is said, wins championships, and especially when it comes to pitching in baseball. The Cincinnati Reds had a better pitching staff than the Chicago White Sox, and especially with Red Faber being out. And that fact can't really be disputed. The Reds staff topped the Sox in ERA. Hits allowed through 9 innings, walks allowed through 9 innings, whip. They had a better FIP. And while the White Sox were superior in some traditional stats like strikeouts, when you look deeper at the statistics, the Reds clearly had a stronger staff. Maybe more importantly, they also had a deeper pitching staff. In an era when most pitchers went the entire game, or close to it, the White Sox got 52% of their wins from the 2 pitchers who pitched the most innings for them, Eddie Cicotte and Lefty Williams. By comparison, the top 2 pitchers in innings pitched for the Reds, Hod Eller and Dutch Ruther, accounted for only 39.58% of the Reds' wins. The White Sox, without a healthy Faber, were for the most part essentially 2 aces carrying a staff in a best-of-9 series. But the Reds were strong from top to bottom. 6 pitchers on the Reds had at least 10 wins, and all but one of those 6 had lower ERAs than every single White Sox pitcher, save for Cicotte. So it is hard to believe that the Reds should have been such a big underdog, and harder to believe that people thought they basically had no chance to win this series. Now, number 4, the Reds had home field advantage. People debate to this day the value of home field advantage, but back in 1919, it may have been an even bigger deal than it is today. Remember, things were a lot different back then. You're traveling by a train, just a lot different. Now, the big part to me is, I think the 1919 Cincinnati Reds deserved a lot better than this. Sadly, all of the accomplishment of that 1919 Reds team have been effectively wiped out of the history of baseball. The really unfortunate part was because nothing they did, but in the end, they have been punished almost as badly as the 8 White Sox that supposedly fixed this series. It's just as bad to be forgotten as it is to be reviled. The Red Stars center fielder Ed Roush won his second batting crown by hitting .321 to go along with 20 steals, 20 sacrifices, and a team-high 71 RBIs. Roush is hardly remembered outside of the best baseball historians. Maybe if he would have gotten credit for being the leader of the 1919 World Champion Cincinnati Reds, his fate would have been far different. I will never say that the series wasn't fixed by the White Sox because it's obvious that a few players were on the take. But the 1919 Cincinnati Reds were the true world champions of baseball and should be recognized that way. Statistically, they were the better team, and what a few White Sox players did not tarnish, or should not tarnish, is a legacy of a great team that played the series on the level. All right, guys, I want to thank you all for listening to the Cincinnati Reds Weekly Show. Please let your friends know about it. You can find us on all media platforms that host podcasts, but especially at thegruelingtruth.com. You can also hear us on Spotify, iHeartRadio, iTunes, TuneIn, Spreaker, Stitcher. This is going to be a great year. The Reds are going to be in a pennant race for the first time in a handful of years. So let's follow along. And if you guys have any show topics you want us to talk about, you can tweet them to us at Grueling Truth, either direct message or just tweet it to us. But for now, this has been Mike Goodpaster. You've been listening to the Cincinnati Reds Weekly Show on the Grueling Truth Sports Network.